Thank you. I've got no disclosures. So physiotherapists use digital palpation to assess muscle tone, which is also called tension, hypertonicity, tightness, or muscle stiffness. However, these assessments are subjective, they're not validated, there's unknown reliability, and we've got no standardised training on these assessment techniques. Despite this, standardly, globally, we all use it to assess muscle tone and then base clinical treatments on these assessments. Aim of the study was to assess a physiotherapist's ability to discriminate a 7-point scale for the assessment of muscle stiffness against a novel objective device. This device was developed at the Auckland Bioengineering Institute in Auckland, and we called it the Palpation instrument. It works by having a voice coil motor attached with an analogue feedback for muscle force or for force and for displacement, and you press against the metal probe. It's got a silicone pad on it to replicate soft tissue. The palpation scale that we use was created by modifying a scale published by Riesling in 2005. It's a 7-category scale, so it goes from +3, which is high stiffness, down to -3, which is missing at the bottom, which is low stiffness, and 0 was determined to be normal. The participants were all physiotherapists. We split them into 2 groups, pelvic floor physios and musculoskeletal physios. And there were 2 parts to the study, which was completed over 10 months. In part 1, the scale category was randomised and was given to the participants to identify, and they asked the researcher to either increase the resistance the device gave them or decrease, and they were blinded to what the device was doing. So they basically asked the device to be moved until the muscle stiffness met that category according to their interpretation of that scale. In part 2, the muscle stiffness was set on the machine, and then they gave the category. And this was done. Part 1 was done, and then a few months later, part 2 was done. There were 84 participants in each part of the stage, and there were even division between musculoskeletal and pelvic floor physios. We had physios ranging from 3 months clinical experience up to 56 years clinical experience. So we had very inexperienced physios and very, very experienced physios. And 11 countries were represented in their undergraduate training. When we looked at the probability of assigning stiffness values to each of the palpation categories, there was low probability. So if we looked at the mean that they determined for normal muscle, which was 462 Newton per metre, as a normal muscle stiffness, you had a 30% chance of putting it into that category. But you could also have put it into -2 up to +3. When we looked at consistency, were they able to put the same scale category or the stiffness into the same category, then there was very low probability, consistency in the use of the scale. So over the whole scale, none of them got within 10% of margin of error. When we looked at the individual categories, some physios were very precise. They could categorise +3 very well. Other ones were not so well at 92% margin of error. Okay, and there was no apparent pattern for years of experience or type of physiotherapist. So the conclusion is that if we're going to continue to use palpation for measuring muscle stiffness to define treatment, it should be used very much with caution. And if palpation is to be used, we need a validated and a reliable scale to be developed using an objective measuring device as a reference standard. And then standardised training should be provided globally to potentially lead to improved reliability and consistency in assessment. And I just want to say thank you to my funders and to all the physiotherapists, some of whom are in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. It's open for the questions.
Thank you for this presentation, Mélanie Morin. I would like to know, can you tell us more about the experience of your rater? Because you said that there was no difference, but what was the range? Were they used to that scale before?
So none of them had exposure. So they all reported that they measured muscle stiffness in their clinical practice, and that ranged from 3 months out to 56 years out. They all had to have been palpating 30 minutes a week, minimum. And none of them used scales, even though they reported measuring muscle stiffness. None of them used a scale, none of them had been trained in use of a scale. but they all used it for their clinical treatment. So this scale was new to them, so they got it right in front of them, they could read it all, etc. And some of the participants took part in the second stage of the study as well, using the same scale.
Okay, Kari?
I just have a comment because I think this is a very important study and it's really sound for our profession that we are questioning what we are doing in clinical practice. So I will congratulate it and I urge all of us to do studies like this because it's much needed. We are very often very self-confident in what we think we can feel, but maybe it's not correct. So thank you.
I have a question as well. Well, you want to evaluate if digital palpation is a good measure for this muscle stiffness, and the device was not validated, what you said, but is there a golden standard for measuring stiffness?
The device was validated against a stiffness measure. It was used in the engineering department and was validated as to which stiffness was produced. So we knew that it was validated, but we haven't tested reliability or anything else like that. It was just basically to say if we gave these measurements or stiffness values to physios, what did they think? Where did it fit in the scale? How did they use it?
So the golden standard for measuring muscle stiffness, what is that?
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question.
Sarah Dean from Exeter in the UK. I just reinforce what Carrie was saying. This is great because I think our measurement science really needs to up its game, and this looks like you're on the right track. So well done, keep going. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.